Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and welcome back to the second series of the ScotsCare podcast. ScotsCare is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots in London through a range of support, including financial grants, advocacy, counselling and sheltered housing for older Scots, job coaching, social events, befriending, and support for children and families. The charity's been running for 400 years to help break the cycle of poverty experienced by some Scots. In the new series, I'll be chatting with guests from all walks of life, from celebrities and authors, athletes and actors, business entrepreneurs to academics, all with one thing in common: Scots heritage, and they enjoy a good blether. Sue Palmer is the ScotsCare podcast guest this week. She is a former head teacher in the Scottish Borders, an educationalist, having written over 200 books. These books include Toxic Childhood and 21st Century Boys. Sue and I sat down a while back, and as a father of three, I was really looking forward to this chat, especially as two of my kids are lads. We chatted a lot about the book Toxic Childhood and how much it scared me. The thorny subject of social media came up, and how much screen time all our kids are subject to these days. What was really interesting was talking about generational change, especially in respect to how I played outside in the streets as a kid, compared to how my children play outside these days. She is a truly remarkable writer and speaker. It was a joy to chat with her. So here she is, Sue Palmer on the ScotsCare podcast. Hi, Sue.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you for inviting me.
How are you feeling? Because you said you were getting over a virus. Are you getting over COVID?
I think it was COVID, actually. I didn't have any of the testing things in the house, but all the symptoms fitted, and it was nasty. And I'm now really, really tired. So I think I might have that sort of fatigue thing that you get at the end of it as well.
Yeah, I've had it twice now. And the first time I had it, I kind of ruined the kids' Christmas. I had it right. I tested positive on Christmas Eve 2 years ago. And then on Christmas Day, I was useless.
It knocks you, doesn't it? Absolutely knocks you out.
And then I had a full, once I was clear of it, I still had a full 6 weeks. And I was getting to the, where I was, like you were talking about, being exhausted. And I got to like week 5 and started to feel a bit kind of, this worries me a bit, because I was felt okay, but if I sat down, I could just go to sleep.
Yes.
I felt so exhausted. But then there seemed to be like somebody flicked a switch on week 6, and it just seemed to go away.
Please God, because it's just I'm sleeping for Britain at the moment.
It's funny, isn't it? The next time I had it, which again was just this Christmas, but just before, it was like COVID light. It was like an inconvenience rather than the first time that really blindsided me.
Well, were you inoculated the first time? Had you had the vaccination?
Not the first time, and then
right, there you go. I mean, I've had all the vaccinations all the way through, so I don't think it was anywhere near. I mean, I was only feeling really poorly for about a week, but it's just this tiredness. Yeah. So thank goodness for the vaccinations, I say.
Yeah. Well, I hope speedy recovery and all that. But
thank you.
Yeah. You're very much an honorary Scot, because you were born in Manchester, but you've been here forever.
I worked it out this morning. I have been here for half my adult life. I was born in, I lived in Salford, but happened to be born in Manchester because my mum was in a maternity hospital there. But came to Scotland in 1970 at the age of 19. And actually, I think I actually did fall in love as I came out of Waverley Station, because it was a beautiful sunny day, and Edinburgh just was so beautiful. And I was knocked out by, I love living in Scotland. So I was here till 83, when a terrible domestic drama sent me home. And then I didn't get back until 2007. So I've been here again 16 years now. But all the time I was away, I was back living in England, and all I could think of was getting back to Scotland, actually.
So are you in Edinburgh now?
I'm in Edinburgh now.
Yeah, I somebody else that I was chatting to is an author, actually, a children's author called Debbie Leori,
Oh, I know. Yes, I've come across Debbie.
and
Yes.
she was talking about Waverley, and she was talking about how much she loved Edinburgh because as you come out of Waverley, as you go up the steps, Edinburgh just seems to rise above you, and you get this
And you've
vista.
got the castle at one end, and you've got that bank of beautiful, beautiful buildings on your left. And there's Scott monuments going up on the right, and in front of you, the gardens and the two art galleries. And I mean, I was raised in Salford, for goodness sake, and this was just like it was a European city, a beautiful, beautiful European city. Um, just stunning. I actually I dropped my I dropped my luggage, and actually said out loud, "Why did nobody tell me?"
And it is beautiful, and it's changed. Edinburgh's changed so much in the last 20 years. Since
It
I used to
has.
work in Leith
Yeah.
before the Parliament, and it was just a bomb site. And then over the last 20 years in the Parliament there, and the gentrification, and it's really, but hugely
Yeah,
expensive.
and the trams, of
Yeah.
course. But I taught in briefly in Leith, in Bonington, which was it was pretty dreadful area. My goodness, that some of the lives those kids were living. And then my granddaughter ended up going back to Bonington School because it's now the Gaelic school, and they've made it
Ah,
beautiful. Um, so yeah, it's changed a huge amount. That during the period that I was away, it changed, and I don't know absolutely for the better in terms of the posh bit of the city, but certainly the living conditions down in other parts are infinitely better.
yeah. Well, what I wanted to talk to you today was mainly about kids and
Mm.
parenting, and because I found you through one of your books, and you've written so many books, but I found you through the book Toxic Childhood: How the Modern World is Damaging Our Children and What We Can Do About It. And I was thinking about, I struggle with being a parent. I love it. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. I've got two boys and a girl. 14 and 10 are my boys, and my little girl Indy is 4. And I think
Oh,
the thing I struggle with a lot of the time is that my only point of reference as a parent is me, and
yeah.
how I grew up, and what my parents did. And I sometimes I wonder if it's parents of every subsequent generations think the same thing, that the world is changing so much and the world is changing so fast. But because I think this all the time now, that I look at what Noah and Rafe and Indy go through, and the amount of information they have coming at them, and the amount of things they have to deal with. And for me, growing up in the 70s and 80s, that was phenomenally different because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have television after Blue Peter finished at 5:25. We didn't have. I remember watching telly at the weekend, and it finished at like 11:30 or 12, and then World of Sport would come on. So we didn't have this constant bombardment of information. Do you think it is different, genuinely different for our under 16s now?
I think that your generation, and my daughter was one of them as well, was one of the last generations that got what was typically, in the overwhelming majority of cases throughout the millennia, what people thought of as a childhood. And that meant that a lot of the time you were outdoors playing with your mates with a great deal of freedom, that you lived in a community where you actually knew quite a lot of people, possibly had grannies and aunties and people around as well as parents. One of the things I hear very often from kids from Scotland is, my mum would give, well, old people now, but my mum would give us a jelly piece, and we'd be out and it'd say, "Come back when the lights go on, the street lights
Yes,
go on."
yes,
So it was but that is normal for human beings. One of the things, I mean, I was in education for most of my professional career, so I was a specialist in literacy, and it was all about schooling and everything. And it wasn't until I did an interview with a speech and language therapist in 1998 for the Times Educational Supplement, and she'd found really quite distressing statistics on children's language development changing from the late 80s, going downhill. Very young children's language development going downhill from the late 80s to the late 90s. And we just started talking about why this could have happened. And she just said, the world has changed so much. We've just not really thought about the knock-on effects of the fact that childhood is different. And that talk with her, and then subsequently talking to experts in other areas, was why I wrote Toxic Childhood, because I think it is a very different experience. And I particularly was bothered for parents, because I think, like you say, parents are more isolated and more pressurized now than I think in any time in history. And your parents hardly saw you. You were out playing all the time.
But you know what? Yes, we will be out playing, and it's strange you should say that, because I think I've said that to a few podcast guests about my mum. I would say to my mum, when do you want me back? And they'd say, when the lights come on. Yeah. And I have this clear memory of, a better run. The lights are going to come on. And I didn't see my dad much. My mum and dad were together, but my dad worked hard and he worked 6 days a week, and he was a driving instructor. And I often used to have an experience of seeing my dad driving past in his car, teaching people to drive, and I would wave to him and he would wave out the window. But he finished at 8 or sometimes 9 o'clock at night. And then he'd be away early in the morning. So I'd be lucky if I saw him on a Sunday. So it was a very different type of parenting.
Well, I didn't see much of I don't think dads were, especially if they had jobs that weren't around the home, if they weren't farming or something like that. Didn't see them. My dad was either away working or he was playing cricket. So, you didn't see much of dads, really, did you?
No, it was different.
But again, that's why we now talk about parenting. I mean, there wasn't any, I think the word didn't come into the dictionary really until about the 90s, when it became necessary in order to help dads recognize that they actually had a part in this procedure.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's the other big thing that's changed, is women going into the workforce means that there's a lot more actually paid for childcare and that sort of thing. So it is a very, very different world that the kids are living in and that the parents are living in. And I don't think that policymakers have really taken it into account. Their job has been to get parents into the workforce. Hard-working parents was the phrase that you used to hear right through the early 2000s. And there's keeping the kids off the street. It was the reason really that they were starting some degree of funded nursery provision. But it's not really been thinking about, what actually is it doing to everybody? That we are living such very, very different lives. And I think that they've turned, the parenting industry, with all its books and I was so worried about Toxic Childhood. I really didn't want it to be part of that, because all these books about how to do it and everything, it starts making you feel so inadequate. My point I was trying to make is, it's not your fault. The world's changed, and it's about time we all started thinking how we change. Well, my current job is running a campaign for a change in universal services. I think we should do what seems to be the most productive thing for early childhood, and that is introduce a kindergarten stage similar to what they have in the Nordic countries, to reinstate the play.
Well, and I that really interested me when I read your thoughts on that, because my 3 kids, we live just outside London. My 3 kids went to school at age 4, which is phenomenally young.
Ridiculous, insane.
But let's talk about this book, Toxic Childhood, because it scared the life out of me, because so much resonated, because I'm living through it. And a lot of the time, as I said, as a parent, as a person, I feel overwhelmed by the world. But can you tell us and the listeners what you mean by toxic?
Well, basically, I called it Toxic Childhood Syndrome. It's simply that all these things have come together. I ended up, when I used to go around talking to parents, and one of the reasons I'm now a campaigner is I couldn't bear the fact that these parents were all so anxious. And I thought, flipping government's got to step in on this. So that's why I started sort of campaigning for changes to the education system. But basically, I reckon it was like a perfect storm that happened in the 80s. You got three cultural fronts hitting at once. The first one was the incredible speed of progress driven by digital technology. I mean, it really hotted up in the 1980s. The second one was the sort of acceptance of consumerism, competitive consumerism, as a sort of global economic force on the planet. That Reaganism and Thatcherism and everything hit them. And the third was the fact that women were beginning to want to have a bit more of a life than just being stuck on the domestic front all the time. And you were seeing more and more women wanting to move into the workforce. So that there was a change in the personal family circumstances there, and then these massive changes going on, all hitting at once, and you never knew where the next one was coming from.
And my family has been affected by all of these things.
Yeah.
In that my kids have no concept of linear television anymore, because anything they want to see it now. And my dad, who passed away during COVID, we used to go and visit him, and he lived in Saltcoats in the west coast of Scotland, and he had a telly with an aerial on the roof. And the kids would say, "Oh, well, can we watch whatever, Fireman Sam?" And my dad would say to them, "You can watch what's on the telly." And they couldn't grasp that concept. And then the other point of the triangle, that kind of globalization you were talking about, and my kids can get anything they want from anywhere on the planet. From, not that they should do, because we try and enforce a sustainability policy in our house of, should we really be ordering this thing from China? It's not the way to go. And that just terrifies me. And then my wife and I were out working at the same time, so we had the kids in childcare, and that was another mortgage. That was at one point. Yeah. At that point, we were working when my oldest was very young, and what I or my wife was bringing home was just about covering the childcare. So we were working I think there was 40 quid a month left at the end of the month. It's bonkers figures.
And the thing is, everybody's so busy just keeping their head above water, and it's going to get even worse with the cost of living crisis going on. Nobody ever, sort of makes a fuss about, we've got to do something about this. But I mean, we have. The good news, I decided when I got, as I say, I got a bit depressed writing the book, but I've always had huge sort of faith in the human spirit, and that we are pretty clever species. We should be able to sort this stuff out. And the good news, I think, is that evolutionary biology is fascinating. It's what I've been doing the last 20 years now. And we are so successful because we are so social. Essentially, it's our social nature and our adaptability that's made us such a successful species. And that is still in there. That resilience and that adaptability and our capacity to collaborate is still there. So there is absolutely no reason why we can't adjust the way we live in order to make it more comfortable for everyone. I don't mean comfortable, in fact, in the idea of being able to buy things you want on the internet from China. I mean, humanly, socially and emotionally comfortable. And if you look around at the countries that are making the best fist of it, the Nordic countries always come top. The Netherlands usually doing pretty well. But a lot of it is, I think, to do with the way we raise children, so that the children are adaptable, creative, resilient, social, and able. In those are the really important things that'll see you through. But what we're obsessed with is getting them into school at the earliest possible opportunity and starting them on literacy and numeracy. And of course, as I said, my subject was literacy. So for a lot of my life, that was what I was about. And it was a horrific understanding that, I'd been contributing to this, that it was totally unnecessary what I'd been doing, a lot of it. You don't really need to start teaching children to read till they're 7. Certainly works in Finland and Switzerland and places.
ScotsCare is the only charity that specifically helps homeless and insecurely housed Scots in London. We know if it's not just about somewhere to stay, so we provide a personalised support package that strives to meaningfully engage clients to address their needs and gets to the root causes of their homelessness. See our website for full details.
What we don't have in England here is this primary one or key stage one, year one testing, which they do have in Scotland, which is, I cannot imagine my daughter, who is just becoming a person, having to sit down and say, we're going to do a test.
She does have to now as she goes into reception.
Oh, really?
And they've got a sort of a baseline that they do in the first weeks of reception now. So she will be doing something, and that's the baseline. And then she'll also have the phonics testing in, I think that's year one and year two. So, I mean, it's they've dropped some of the testing, but they're still doing the stuff on the little ones. There is this absolute obsession with cramming phonics into little kids, which is even worse in England and Scotland. But I do agree with you. I mean, I couldn't believe it when Scotland, for the first time ever, introduced literacy and numeracy testing at P1. It's absolute nonsense and really, really just damaging for a lot of kids.
Have you seen the Ken Robinson animation, Changing Education Paradigms?
Absolutely. He was a wonderful man.
That kind of blew me away. It was kind of stuff that I couldn't have articulated myself, but I'd always suspected. My wife and I always felt that way. And I must have watched that 100 times and thought, the way we are educating our children now is the way we were educating our children 100 years ago, yet the world has turned massively. And my Rafe, my 10-year-old, goes to school and he wears a blue shirt and a red tie, and it chokes him all day long. And, he comes home and he looks like he's just been dragged through a bush. It's just not the way that child needs to exist.
Oh, well, I mean, I'll continue to bang my head against, the policymakers' wall for as long as I live. And there are a lot of other people doing it. I mean, eventually, maybe we hope one day we'll make some difference. Actually, have to admit, at the last SNP conference in October, the membership of the Scottish National Party passed a motion for a kindergarten stage for children up to age 7. So we're waiting to see whether anything will come of that with the current Scottish government. But in England, you've got a number of good people. There's an organisation called More Than a Score, which are a brilliant crowd who are sort of fighting to get testing stopped in primary schools and, focus on other aspects of children's development. And can I just say, as a literacy specialist, it is not that I don't think literacy and numeracy are important. I just think we don't need to start hammering on about them until children are about 6.5 to 7. Actually, I prefer 7. And there's research being done in New Zealand that shows that it doesn't matter whether you start teaching at 5 or you start teaching at 7. By the time they're about 11, it's evened out. They're all managed. It's just that the ones who've started later tend to like it more and tend to be rather better at comprehension.
When I was a kid, my mum was a voracious reader. Our house was filled with books. She worked for HarperCollins, and so our house was full of books all the time. And so we read, and my brother read, and maybe it's just because I didn't live in this 24-hour society with tablets and YouTube and stuff like that. And my older boy Noah, it's a battle to get him off TikTok. I could probably, count the number of books in the last year that he's read on one hand. We're always out to read. And I just wonder, is there a problem with modern society and short form video that kills off kids' attention spans so they don't want to read?
It's definitely affecting all of our attention spans. I mean, it would, because there's just so much to distract you. And, we've got, the reason we have two sides to the brain is that one side is essentially a sort of more focused side, and the other side's more sort of keeping attention to the rest of the world. So I don't know whether you come across a guy called Ian McGilchrist.
No.
Another person who's got one of those RSA animates, and there's a very good one about talking about his work. And he's saying, if you think about a bird, it too has a bipartite brain. And if it's looking for food, it's got to be really focusing hard on looking at the ground and pecking. But it's also at the same time got to be keeping aware for predators, or the fact that maybe there's some better food around somewhere else. So you're doing this two things, and that's why you've got a corpus callosum in the middle. You're going backwards and forwards between the two. But if you've got hugely distracting material, which actually is very attractive, that appeals to things that matter to you, then we are going to have more trouble focusing. So it's that at the bottom of a lot of the problems that I think we see for kids learning nowadays, it is this capacity to focus attention. And one of the things about reading is that it hones your capacity to focus into that page.
Yeah, and I find it very settling, because I think we're all guilty of it. And, and I try to read, and I tend to read at night, and, I get 6 or 7 pages, and then the book slips down and I fall asleep. And, and we went on holiday, must be 3 months ago now, and I think I chunned through 3 books, and it was restful. And I felt good about it. And this is, I'm always going to
part of it is that's you're relaxing. You're on holiday, so you're relaxing. There's not other things that are going on. But again, on this one, the good news is it's not just reading that makes you able to focus attention. I mean, that you need to be able to focus attention in order to learn to read in the first place, particularly to read with enjoyment rather than just have something crammed into your head by people making you learn by rote. That we are, our capacity for learning is phenomenal, and the best way is through play. So if you watch a small child playing, they can concentrate for hours on something which looks perfectly meaningless to you. My daughter used to take all the books out of the bookcase. She'd spend hours on it, piling them up, and quite often she'd be doing interesting sorts of piling. And then I'd have to put all the damn things back. But children will play. And the point about play is it's self-directed. It's coming from inside. So that's the sort of focusing you want children to be able to do. And if look at kids working together to sort of build a dam in a stream, or to build a tree, a den or something. All the sort of obvious play things that have happened through the millennia. And it seems to be particularly at that age of 3 to 7 that benefits them enormously, to be active, outdoor and social and playing in a self-directed way.
And that's interesting. There's a quote from you, actually, I read. I've got it. I have it here. Hold on. Yeah, here it is. Until I was about 40, all children played out. We didn't know then how important it was. Ironically, the scientific evidence about the power of play accumulated over the exact same period that children's active, social, outdoor play declined. What are the main factors for the decline in that?
Traffic.
Yeah.
I think when I talked to parents, the main thing that they said was that you just daren't let them out because it's so dangerous, with not just the cars driving along the road, but all the parked cars. That mean that kids could just be so easily damaged by running out between one. But I don't think it was just that. I think I put it in the book. I think a lot of it is that because of the visual media, we're all much more frightened than we used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because all these awful, dreadful things that you hear about are being brought into your home on a regular basis. And with rolling news that you see over and over again, and then certain things you actually want to know about. So I still, as a parent, I still have a very vivid mental image of 2 little girls in red football shirts standing underneath a clock. I don't know whether you're old enough to remember that picture, but it was the 2 little girls in Soham.
No, I don't. And I'm old enough to remember that. I remember that, but I don't remember the picture.
Well, all those dreadful, very, very rare occurrences of children being abducted and killed and damaged in horrible ways. It's so much more, if you're getting these visual memories of them, apparently what the the neuroscientists say is it sort of bypasses the rational parts of your brain, goes straight to your amygdala, and you just get this emotional terror that it's going to happen to me.
Yes, I am. I totally understand that, and I'm guilty of that cotton wool parenting. I mean, when I was 10, I was a latchkey kid. Literally had a bit of string around my neck, and my mum and dad were out working. I'd come home at lunchtime from my school, and my school must have been about a mile and a half away. And I remember telling my 10-year-old this, and I said, I'd come home at lunchtime and make my own lunch. And he said, did you live very near the school? And I went, no, I've crossed 3 or 4 major roads, but I still don't let my 10-year-old Rafe go. We live near a supermarket. I wouldn't let him go to the supermarket on his own, and there's only one road to cross.
I mean, it becomes cyclical, because if the kids do get the chance to play, they get much more competent, and they feel self-confident. You feel confident in them because they've managed it. But when they can't, and quite frankly, I think in most cities now, you wouldn't be able to let kids out. I wouldn't. My daughter certainly doesn't, or didn't. She's lucky enough to be in a smaller town now, so a bigger kid can walk to school. But it is, and of course we became, the planet became more urbanized. I think there's more people living in cities than there are living in rural environments. And I think that change was about 2012. So all these changes are affecting what we're looking at. But what we've got to do as a species is realize that it's not just the planet that we've been damaging by the way we've been behaving, it's our own species. We've got to start making sure that we look after our little ones in the best possible way. And it isn't difficult, because it was people had to be able to do it in the most difficult and challenging of circumstances, but managed it. So at the moment, I think, because there's a lot we can't control, we need to be looking to our policy makers to be thinking about how are we looking after children in what is early childhood is defined as birth to 8.
Okay.
And I think that is particularly significant, because that's the period when your brain's really forming at an enormously rapid speed.
Homeless Scots in London are overrepresented in the homeless population. We are on hand to support them into safe and secure accommodation through financial grants, mental health support, addiction support and referrals. Our outreach workers work with our clients to find the best strategy back to a home and continue to be there as they adjust to life away from the streets.
Can I talk to you about the difference in children's brains? Because 2 books that I really liked was yours, 21st Century Boys, and then Steve Biddulph's Bringing Up Boys.
So yes, Steve Biddulph and his book on boys, and the fairly obvious common sense that he always speaks.
Yeah, I did want to talk to you about that, because I've got 2 boys and a girl, and everyone thinks their own kids are good. They're good, and I do believe my boys are good, but they're very different from my little girl. My boys are like wild dogs, and while their play isn't violent, it's certainly a lot more boisterous than the way my daughter plays. And I've said this to other people. It's like, if my daughter goes quiet, I know that she's just doing something or building something or reading a book. If my boys go quiet, I think there's a problem. And it's because you think, oh no, something's broken or something's damaged. But boys are different, aren't they, Sue? And I think it's something, this is probably not a politically correct thing to say, but boys are boys. Boys will be boys. They're a different species.
Well, according to the research I read, and people will contest things, but overall the stuff that I looked at, there are very small differences at birth in terms of developmental capacity, sort of socialization, distractibility, and so on, in that boys are less social, and indeed then learn to speak usually a little later, and are slower to do all sorts of social things, and then don't drive at school as well, particularly if they start early. Girls much more social, much better at pleasing people. So those very small differences are incredibly exaggerated and exacerbated by our cultural expectations. And those cultural expectations are now sort of embedded because we're picking them up from the moment we're born, and we make assumptions about what females are like and what males are like. So you've got the huge problem that's a lot of it is cultural, but it's incredibly embedded cultural expectations. And I think you have to accept that the combination of nature and nurture does mean that boys and girls will have different problems as they get older. But I'm a bit bothered because there's changes in the way boys and girls are reacting to things, and particularly girls. One wonderful child psychologist I spoke to said, what you find is that if there are problems, if children, boys will be boisterous, and that's normal and healthy, and healthy if it's a girl as well. But with boys generally, if anything goes wrong, they'll tend to kick out and maybe cause problems. So you notice them. Girls will turn it in on themselves.
Yeah.
And blame themselves.
So do you think we are too quick these days to say that, there seems to be, in my kids' school, there's a lot of ADHD and ADD diagnoses. Are we too quick to get there these days?
I think I was talking about this yesterday, actually. It's a combination of all sorts of things. Basically, there was no such thing as ADHD till 1980, right? Didn't exist. Nobody had defined it. But there were obviously some children who found it more difficult to settle down and focus. Yeah. We just didn't give it a name. And I had little boys in my class, and it was always, I have to admit, always little boys in my class who found it difficult to focus in the 1970s. And I mean, there was one that I used to say, oh, Brian, just go and run once around the school field, will you? Get it out of you and come back and see if you can settle. It was the same with the other developmental issues. So it is normal for some people to find it more difficult to settle. But if you live in a culture where, well, first of all, you're being constantly, honestly, sorry, I'm having a bad day for words. It's probably the COVID. There's people charming you on screens into something which will keep your attention there, but will mean that you're finding it more difficult to pay attention elsewhere. So if you're living in an environment that is actually manipulating your attention skills in ways that aren't probably in your best interests, if you're in a culture where they send little children into classrooms at the age of 4 or 5 and make them sit down and do worksheets and sort of learn stuff that really seems meaningless to them. If children are not getting the opportunities that would naturally have occurred in the past for them to get out and active and use up all their energy in this way, it's hardly surprising that the ADHD statistics will go zooming up.
Yeah, that does make sense. You mentioned earlier about the kindergarten system, and so if they didn't go to school at 4, would they remain or go into a more play-based nursery environment?
What we're asking for in Scotland is a kindergarten stage between the ages of 3 and 7. And there's a good evolutionary reason for that. If you think about, for millennia, in every sort of part of the world, for the first year or so, the first couple of years, a baby would be with its mum all the time because she'd probably she'd be feeding it. Round about the age of 2.5 to 3, mum would probably have another baby. So the older baby would need to be looked after, and it would be looked after by the other kids. So from about 2.5, the older children would look after the little ones. By the time they reached 7 or 8, they'd be old enough to do things to help the family in terms of things like going and getting the water or looking after the beasts or something. So they'd start getting initiated into the adult world. It was that group of 3 to 7 to 8 year olds. They looked after each other, and there's so much research now coming through. There's a great guy called Peter Gray that's pulling it all together at the moment, showing that if you have mixed age between 3 and 7, or indeed at any stage, but that particularly as a critical one, the kids naturally, the little ones look up to the big ones. The big ones like looking after the little ones because it makes them feel important. And it helps them develop empathy.
It seems a very natural process. I do watch my 10-year-old play with my 4-year-old, and they get on like a house on fire. And
it really works. Yeah. So the basic principle would be that for 3 to 7, it's a play-based, relationship-centered, an awful lot about the adults' relationships with the children being particularly positive, not sort of, judging them on whether they can pass some sort of test or something, but actually encouraging children's development, supporting them at what they are good at doing and helping them along. With obviously a literacy-rich environment, a science-rich environment, that the stuff we provide will help them decide what they want to play at. But it's play-based with a lot of self-directed play and active and social and mixed age. And that's what we're campaigning for in Scotland at the moment.
So I've just got a couple of final questions for you. One question that I want to ask, moving on from that one, looking at our older kids, I read more and more about teenage alcohol and drug abuse and suicide in teenagers, and it terrifies me. And I just wonder what we can do to improve our communication with our slightly older children.
Well, all the language, all the research shows it's not so easy for parents because, of course, I know this as a parent myself, you've got your own tensions going on there, but the mentor thing is the thing that makes the difference round about the age of 13, 14. If you're lucky enough to have an adult who's an aunt or an uncle or a granny or a granddad or a friend or something, that's family friend, that can be a mentor to the kids, that seems to make a big difference. Although I have to say, I think a lot of it's very boring of me, but I keep going back to this business of early childhood. If you get it right then, and you're building resilience and self-regulation and social skills and, just general common sense, hopefully that's going to be a huge help right through life. Because that resilience is what you need to see through all the ups and downs. But at all stages, you benefit from having people that are close to you that you can talk to, and an older mentor around about the beginning of the teenage years seems to be a very, very helpful thing.
I think the final thing I'd ask you is how you come across, having us chatted for the last half hour or so, as wonderfully pragmatic, and it could be argued that we've bequeathed a rather hellish future globally to our kids. And are you emotionally positive that they have it within themselves to rise above it and prevail?
I have huge confidence in children. I just think we've got to make sure that we do the best for them, and I don't think that we've put our minds to what is the best for them. I think we've all got this nonsense of a competitive attitude to education. People thrive because they're healthy, not because they've been crammed. So I think we've got to, as soon as possible, change the way we look after our kids.
Sue, it's been brilliant talking to you. Thanks for joining me on the ScotsCare podcast today.
Thank you. It's been nice to talk.
Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Saltire Donor Club is our monthly giving club. Could you spare a monthly donation of any amount to help homeless and vulnerable Scots? Visit our website to give monthly and join the Saltire Donor Club. It couldn't be easier, and it will make a difference to those struggling in London.